Two tomato plants are growing in the exact same garden bed. They share the same soil, the same fertilizer, and have followed the same watering schedule throughout the entire season. Yet one plant sits there, looking dull and yellowed at its oldest leaves, with fruit forming without any real conviction. The other plant remains a deep, vibrant green, heavy with clusters of produce. The difference between these two is found in a cloudy mason jar containing two simple ingredients from the medicine cabinet and the bath aisle, mixed together in under 2 minutes. This is nothing from a garden center, and certainly nothing you could even buy pre-mixed on a shelf. Most gardeners have stood in front of a plant just like that first one. The leaves at the bottom are turning yellow, but the pattern is uneven. The yellowing runs specifically between the veins, while the veins themselves stay green. Or perhaps a transplant went into the ground 3 weeks ago and nothing has moved since. The plant is technically alive, but it is not pushing any new growth. In other cases, tomatoes and peppers have been fed on a strict schedule all season, yet growth has slowed significantly. The fruit is smaller than expected, and adding more fertilizer changes absolutely nothing. That specific pattern, in its various forms, points to the same overlooked question. It is not a matter of whether the soil is missing nutrients, but whether the plant can actually get to them. The usual instinct when leaves start yellowing is to feed the plant harder, more nitrogen, more bloom booster, or more of whatever happens to be on the shelf at eye level. But here is the fundamental problem with that logic. Fertilizer put into soil where roots cannot effectively work is like pouring water into a glass that is already full. The nutrients go in, but the plant simply cannot get them out. Nothing changes, and the frustrated gardener just keeps buying more products. The visible part of the plant, the leaves, the color, the fruit, is often the last place the problem actually lives. The decision to turn yellow, to stall, or to drop fruit early was a decision made underground days or sometimes a week before anything ever showed above the soil line. Roots are not passive pipes. They are the underground engine of everything that happens above, and they do not work in silence. They breathe. Root hairs, which are the actual absorption surface, require oxygen to drive the chemical exchange that moves material from the soil into the plant's vascular system. Soil biology research has identified oxygen availability as the third most important factor in soil fertility, ranking just after water and nutrients. When soil becomes compacted, overwatered, or sits too heavily in clay, the air pockets collapse. Oxygen is pushed out. What fills that space instead is water and eventually the kinds of microbes that thrive without air. The anaerobic kind that can damage roots and cause rot. In that environment, even a well-fed plant cannot absorb what it needs. The nutrients are there, but the door is closed. And separately, a second problem often runs beneath the first. The two ingredients in that mason jar are not exotic. One is the brown bottle most people keep in their medicine cabinet for cuts and scrapes. 3% hydrogen peroxide, which costs about $1.50 at any drugstore. The other is Epsom salt from the bath aisle, a mineral gardeners have argued about for decades. Together, they cost under $2 per use, and most people already have both in their house. Hydrogen peroxide looks like water and pours like water, but it is not water. Water is H2O, two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen. Hydrogen peroxide is H2O2, with one extra oxygen atom attached. When that molecule contacts the soil, it begins to decompose. Within hours or sometimes even faster, it releases that extra oxygen directly into the root zone, then breaks down completely into plain water. There is no residue and no buildup. It provides a brief targeted pulse of oxygen delivered exactly where root hairs need it most. That pulse matters most in soil that has gone airless, such as compacted beds, heavily watered containers, clay ground that drains slowly, or anywhere roots have been sitting in low oxygen conditions. The hydrogen peroxide does not fix compaction permanently, it opens a window. In that window, roots can breathe, microbial balance can shift, and the plant can begin moving nutrients through its system the way it was already trying to do. Now consider the Epsom salt, which is magnesium sulfate. The reason gardeners have argued about it for years is that most use it without understanding exactly when it helps and when it does not. Here is the specific biology. Magnesium is the central atom of every chlorophyll molecule a plant makes. It is not a peripheral element, it is the center. Without adequate magnesium, the plant cannot build the green working surface that captures sunlight and converts it into energy. When that surface breaks down, older leaves begin to yellow between the veins, while the veins themselves hold green because the plant pulls magnesium away from old tissue to protect new growth. Sulfur, the other part of magnesium sulfate, supports the enzymes and proteins that help the plant transport and process nutrients internally. It is not a headline element, but it is important when it runs short. Here's the part that becomes obvious once you understand the chemistry. Garden centers cannot sell this mixture pre-made. This isn't because of regulations, but because of shelf life. Hydrogen peroxide is highly unstable. It degrades on contact with organic material, heat, metal traces, and light. A pre-mixed bottle sitting on a retail shelf would lose its active peroxide within days or weeks, leaving nothing but water by the time it reached the garden. Both ingredients are sold separately because the problem is the combination, which must be prepared fresh and used immediately. The shelf requires stability, but biology requires freshness. However, here is the part that catches most gardeners off guard. The hydrogen peroxide is not a fertilizer. It does not feed the plant anything. It is a self-erasing tool, one that creates a brief breathing window in the root zone, then disappears completely within hours. The gardener is not pouring nutrition into the ground. They are reopening a door that compaction, poor drainage, or heavy watering had quietly shut. And the Epsom salt is not a general plant tonic. If your soil already has adequate magnesium, Epsom salt does nothing useful, and over repeated use, it can cause real problems. Magnesium and calcium compete for the same uptake pathways in the root. Too much magnesium pushes calcium availability down. That imbalance can worsen blossom and rot in tomatoes, the very condition some gardeners try to use Epsom salt to fix. The ingredient sounds universally gentle, but it is actually highly specific. This brings us to the real point. This mix is not stronger than fertilizer. It may simply be what finally allows the fertilizer you already applied to start working. Blocked root oxygen and depleted magnesium are two of the most common reasons plant nutrition stalls in otherwise well-fed gardens. The $2 preparation is not competing with fertilizer. It may be removing what was blocking it. To prepare this, use a clean glass jar or plastic container, not metal. Even small traces of metal can accelerate peroxide decomposition, sending the oxygen releasing into the container before it ever reaches a root. Use filtered water, rainwater, or tap water left to sit uncovered for 30 minutes if possible. This is not because chlorine ruins the application, but because it can interact with soil biology in ways that undercut what you are working toward. Regarding temperature, use room temperature or slightly warm water, but not hot. Heat breaks hydrogen peroxide down before it reaches the soil. If the water is too warm, the oxygen releases in the jar. You may see a small amount of foam, and by the time you pour, most of the active peroxide is already spent. The ratio is 1 tablespoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide to 1 quart of water. This produces a dilute solution well below any threshold where roots face risk. Into that same quart, add 1 level teaspoon of Epsom salt and stir briefly. The liquid will look slightly cloudy. If you notice a faint effervescence when it contacts organic material on the spoon or in the jar, that is the oxygen beginning to release, which is confirmation that the peroxide is still active. Use it within minutes of mixing. Do not prepare it and set it aside for later, and do not seal it in an airtight container. Pour slowly around the base, directly into the soil, not over the leaves. At these concentrations, hydrogen peroxide is safe for the root zone, but even dilute concentrations can spot or scorch leaf surfaces, particularly in warm conditions. Epsom salt applied directly onto leaves can cause similar damage. This is a soil and root treatment. Keep it there. For a tomato or pepper in a garden bed, 1 to 2 quarts poured slowly at the base is enough. For a container plant, apply until you see light drainage from the bottom. Morning is the best time because roots are active, the soil is warming, and the mixture has time to work before afternoon heat arrives. Avoid applying right before or during heavy rain, as the dilution washes the benefit away. before the root zone can absorb it. Do not repeat this more than once every 3 to 4 weeks. The hydrogen peroxide resets itself and is gone within hours anyway. But the Epsom salt is the component that accumulates in soil if overused. Timing within the growing season matters as much as the mixture itself. The most responsive windows are at transplant, during early establishment when roots are still building out, at the first sign of interveinal yellowing on older leaves, and when a plant that had been growing steadily simply stalls without explanation. There are a few ways to ruin this completely. The most damaging mistake is using the wrong concentration of hydrogen peroxide. The drugstore bottle is 3%. Some gardeners source concentrated agricultural grades, 35% or higher, assuming more is better. Above roughly 5%, peroxide can damage root cells and kill the beneficial soil microbes the plant depends on. The margin between helpful and harmful is not wide. Use 3% only. Using hot water is the second most common mistake, as the oxygen releases in the kitchen rather than the root zone, and the gardener ends up pouring warm salt water at the plant's roots, which accomplishes nothing. Premixing and saving for later is the third mistake. After an hour, the peroxide has largely broken down, and by morning, it is gone. Mix immediately before using and do not store. Applying over the leaves instead of at the soil wastes the preparation and can cause surface spotting. The mechanism belongs underground. Spraying it over foliage misses the point entirely. Finally, applying Epsom salt repeatedly when magnesium is not actually the limiting factor is where the quietest long-term damage happens. Salt accumulates in soil, calcium uptake falls, and the plant becomes harder to help, not easier. The plants most likely to show a visible response are heavy feeders in containers or depleted beds, such as tomatoes, peppers, roses, and cucumbers. Containers are especially prone to magnesium depletion because every watering pushes soluble minerals past the roots and out through the drainage holes. After a full season in a container, the magnesium available to the plant can be genuinely exhausted. Roses make heavy demands on magnesium through a long flowering season, and pepper plants nearing fruit set often show the interveinal yellowing that marks a real deficiency. For acid-loving plants like azaleas or rhododendrons in sandy leach soil, the same logic applies. Low pH, fast-draining ground is where magnesium runs short first. Trees and established perennials will respond more slowly, if at all, because their root systems draw from a much larger soil volume. Now, a clear word about what to actually expect. A lot of content online frames this mix as an overnight transformation, doubled growth, instant recovery, or visible change by morning. That is not what the biology supports. The hydrogen peroxide benefits soil that is genuinely oxygen-starved. In well-aerated ground, it breaks down harmlessly and changes little. The Epsom salt is useful exactly where magnesium is genuinely missing, and not everywhere it gets routinely added. A soil test before committing to any regular routine will tell you whether the magnesium component applies to your ground at all. These two ingredients address real and specific problems. When those problems are actually present and the timing is right, the change is visible, measurable, and costs almost nothing. That is the honest version of the claim. Look back at those two tomato plants. The treated one still carries its old yellowed leaves. That tissue is not coming back. But the new growth at the top is a different color entirely, deeper and greener. The mason jar is still on the bench, emptied and rinsed. The garden rewarded timing and two cheap ingredients, not a label from the fertilizer aisle. There is another pantry ingredient worth knowing next. If this breakdown of soil chemistry changed the way you look at the struggling plants in your garden, please subscribe and like the video. We are digging up the botanical secrets that have been overlooked for too long. Let's cultivate a better future together. The next garden treasure will be revealed very soon.